Alrighty, we should be recording. My volume looks really low. Let me see if that's better. Okay. Cool.
All right. So today we are beginning as it were, some of the founding documents, from the United States of America, that connect with our whole theme on political and social theory and thought. So, and sort of gonna run the American documents pretty much to the end,
Mm-hmm.
even though the last book is dealing with identity politics, but I'm sure it'll probably be in the context of, or at least some of it will be in the context of American concerns. So today we start with the Articles of Confederation as well as the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
Um, so I had to do a little bit of research. Well, a lot of research, but I had to do a little bit of research, and I think maybe the one thing we should say at the beginning, for all of our many listeners, is that we are not historians, and there's a lot of historical context now dealing with these documents,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the Constitution, which will start next week. So it's good to sort of get that out on the table. But some of the stuff that I found were that I think are sort of important is that a lot of this is going on in the context. So the writing of the Articles of Confederation and the Declaration of Independence are going on in the context of the Revolutionary War.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of, well, I wouldn't say international yet, but yes, our conflict with Britain. So that's an important context to keep in mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is such there's so much sort of rich material and layering here in terms of understanding these documents. You can't really understand them in a vacuum, sort of like you could maybe Plato. Um, so there's not a lot that's platonic with these documents because there's a real world situation.
Sure. And I think a lot of that
Um,
context is kind of given in the
yeah.
Declaration of Independence, at
Oh my
least.
gosh. Yeah. Yeah. And you could add the articles too.
Yeah.
Um, so one thing to note is that the so you have these 13 colonies in existence,
Mm-hmm.
and um, out of the 13 colonies, they created what they called the Continental Congress. Okay, so it's important to understand that there's already some type of Congress, or if you will, administrating body over the 13 colonies,
Mm-hmm.
even though they are still under the British Crown.
Okay.
Um, so you know, and obviously there's tension, right? Because one has to pay homage to Britain, yet at the same time, there's apparently so many grievances that they want to secede.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's an important context. Let me lay out some dates too, because I was like, when are the Articles of Confederation being written in light of the Declaration of Independence? So um, June 11th, 1776 is when they actually appointed a committee um, to develop this sort of these articles. Okay.
The Confederation
What's
ones.
interesting, the
Yeah.
Articles of Confederation. So that's 11th of June, 1776, which is obviously an important year because in July 4th is when finally the Declaration of Independence is penned and I guess presented
Mm-hmm.
or sent out. So that's just less than a month later. So committees formed first, then it takes a while to write the Articles of Confederation. Um, and I think the bulk of it is written like in the next year, 1777. Um, and then it's finally signed on the 9th of July, 1778. So signed by the delegates that make up this Continental Congress. And then they're ratified finally um, it, in in March of 1781.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then we'll get one more date. Revolutionary War ends in 1783. So
Okay.
you've got almost sort of like, I mean, close to a decade, right, from the first getting together of this group, the Declaration of Independence, the writing of the Articles, um, and Revolutionary War, as I said, ends in 1783, and then the U.S. Constitution, as we have it, because then the Articles are no longer in effect with the U.S. Constitution, is basically, it's a long period, or not a long period, it's a 2-year period, 1787 to 1789. So all told, you do have over, um, over a decade from the forming of this group
Mm-hmm.
till finally we get the new, as it were, articles, because the Articles of Confederation are not binding now.
And the
Um,
and the Continental Congress before, I'm looking at dates. Is that 1774 when that was formed?
1776 when they're formed.
No,
The
but before
language
they
is,
were with
oh,
the before they made any sort of declaration or articles. Like you said that
right.
it was already in existence.
No, I'm sorry. I should be clear. Are we talking about
The
the?
first Continental Congress.
Yeah, they meet on the 11th of June, 1776, to just come up with a committee to come up with the articles.
Okay, but were they a body over the colonies
Yes,
before they were
correct,
independent, right? So how long was that
correct.
for?
Yep. Yeah, that I don't fully know. That I like. In other words, I don't know when the colonies set up this idea. Like, in other words, were they sort of just colonies under the British Crown, and then well, obviously they were, and then I'm imagining that over time, then they set up their own Continental Congress. I don't have the date on when that started.
Hmm.
So, but certainly they were in existence in order to form a committee, right?
Right.
By June 11th, 1776. So obviously, context is Revolutionary War, or American Revolution, and we're going to get this in both documents. Obviously, largely in the Declaration of Independence, where all the grievances are listed.
Hmm.
Um, and a couple other important sort of facts here to keep in mind is that France ends up entering the American Revolution on the side of the colonists, um, and what sort of starts as a civil war then becomes sort of this international conflict. Um, and so it's important to keep in mind the French are involved.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, Yeah, apparently in a pivotal battle in Yorktown, the French helped the Continental Army, and the British surrendered in 1781. But fighting sort of like formally ends in 1783. So we
Okay.
did have an ally. Um, so so that we've got these articles, and I imagine we'll start with these. Although I'm really open to start with either.
I mean, the Declaration of Independence comes first, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And it kind of gives context.
yeah,
So I think we should start with that.
yeah. That's fine. That's fine.
I think so. In the first two paragraphs, I was
Hmm.
getting a lot of similar vibes to things that we've recently been reading.
Sure.
About like, or is it the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them.
Hmm.
And then the kind of the latter half of the document felt like a justification. I think they even say to prove this,
Yeah,
right? A
yeah.
justification that the what is it? The let's see, that there's a long train of abuses and usurpations or
Hmm.
usurpations, and absolute despotism.
Yeah, exactly.
So those are all terms that we kind of just discussed last week,
Yeah.
um, with John Locke,
Hmm.
and
Exactly.
yeah. So
In fact, with Locke, the it's very Lockean in certain sections.
yeah.
Um, the You've got in the Declaration. Let's see. All experience hath shown. Where is that? There aren't numbers in
Yeah,
there,
in
so
the
it's not
middle
showing.
of the first second paragraph, and accordingly all
Okay.
experience hath shown that mankind are
Yes,
more
yes,
disposed to
that one.
suffer, while evils are
Yeah,
sufferable.
yes. While evils, yeah, yeah, sorry. While evils are sufferable, then to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed.
Hmm.
And then Locke's language from um, the Second Treatise, quoting section 230, till the mischief be grown general, and the ill designs of rulers become visible, or their attempts sensible to the greater part, the people who are more disposed to suffer than right themselves by resistance are not apt to stir.
Hmm.
So you can, I mean, I mean, it's not word for word, but you've got sort of this growing um, suffering and oppression, as it were, giving you sort of the right to break from it.
Hmm.
There's another one too when it says, yeah, right after that actually. But when a long train of abuses, and this is declaration,
Yep.
and usurpations, what you read before, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government, um, and to provide new guards for their future security.
Hmm.
Locke in section 225, I mean, the language is funny, but if a long train of abuses,
Hmm.
prevarications, and artifices, all tending the same way, make the design visible to the people, and they cannot but feel what they lie under and see whither they are going, it is not to be wondered that they should then rouse themselves and endeavor to put the rule into such hands which may secure to them the ends for which government was first erected.
Hmm.
Um, so that particularly the train of abuses
Hmm.
element. Um, so you've got this sort of like Lockean element. We talked about Locke with the past two sessions, and you know, Lockean theory is obviously being incorporated here in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, and yeah, it's important to note some of that theoretical sort of like structuring.
Hmm. And then actually see how they backed up their argument that that's what's going on. Because
Exactly,
like this
exactly.
this is very, I mean, what's the word? Like Locke's book is very theoretical. But
Yeah,
here we're seeing like an actual example
yeah.
of it
I
in
was thinking the
action.
same thing.
Hmm.
Exactly. It's like um, applied theory,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
In a real situation of yeah oppression and tyranny, as
Hmm.
it were. Now, I do think it's important to analyze some of the statements before we move to the grievances
Okay.
um, that that are sort of like issues to sort of like um, wrestle with. The one element here is the classic line that everyone remembers about the Declaration of Independence, and that is the start where it says, "We, the people of the United States." Um, where is that actually?
Wait, that's not in the Declaration.
Oh, well, no, you're right. You're right. It's not. Sorry. I should. I think. I'm sorry. We hold these truths to be self-evident. So there's a
Mm.
question there about um, who the we is, and I think that as we project toward our last book on identity politics, this issue becomes somewhat relevant, right?
Hmm.
So, I mean, who do you think the we is at this point, right?
Well, it's clearly talking about. I mean, it's whoever wrote this document, right, and the people they represent. So, the. I mean, at the end of the document, we therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in
Hmm.
General Congress assembled appealing Supreme Judge. So the people, the representatives of the United States of America, is what it says
Hmm.
at the in the last paragraph. Um,
Right.
so it's gonna be it's gonna be the 13 colonies, right? 13,
Right.
and then the people contained within those.
Hmm.
Um, of course, I think we're gonna in the Articles of Confederation, you're gonna notice we're gonna notice some interesting, well, kind of, I guess, racist,
Yes.
statements that are
Yeah.
like specifying who's part of which group of
Right.
people.
I think
Those
you're
aren't really
absolutely right.
talked about in the Declaration, though.
No, they aren't. So they aren't specified, but I think that so they aren't specified, right, in the Declaration.
Yeah.
But there is sort of a question about, I mean, two elements here. So we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Um, the, the 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 question, I guess, the question I have about sort of we
Mm-hmm.
is, and also all men are created equal,
Yeah.
is is how we sort of apply that. Is that being applied consistently across the board for all those that are residing
Mm-hmm.
in? I want to be careful. Let's just say in the colonies, okay, not
Mm-hmm.
around. Because from what we know historically, many of the delegates and those who signed the Declaration were slaveholders.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Black men, therefore, are considered property.
Right. Not they
And
would
then,
not fall under the category of men at that time.
right.
Right.
And then, and then also the question of Native Americans as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, I mean, we can even add this as well. You've got slaveholder, or yeah, I'm sorry, slaves themselves, Native Americans, and then also, are there any other type of exclusions? And and I might be out on a limb here a little bit, but all of you know who is a citizen at this point, or who is the all men are created equal,
Right.
because we most I mean, I have all of the delegates and everyone that's signing this. They are male, white,
Yeah.
Protestant landowners,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
And
and I
that's
mean,
who's
like,
being
women and children aren't going to be included in this group either.
right, right. So you've got a very sort of like general statement, actually no, universal statement. But then when you look at the particulars of it, there is this sort of question: to what degree are the delegates actually including these other seemingly
Yeah,
humans
and I
in
think
in
in
it?
that sense, it really comes down to what the term meant at that time,
Yeah,
right? Like, I think the assumption at that time was that men meant men,
right,
and in their context, they're talking about white, Protestant men.
right, right.
Um,
But also
so, but
seemingly
like
too,
nowadays,
what?
if we look at that,
Mhm,
if we have those words now, it's not going to mean the same thing.
right. Which, by the way, that goes to an earlier discussion we had about um, textualism or originalism versus
The intentions,
uh,
right?
the intent. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, no, or
or
yeah,
that would be.
well, versus the spirit,
Mm-hmm.
an evolving spirit, a progressive document, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what you just said sounds a little bit more on the progressive side, right? Because in other words, it meant this at one time, but then its meaning has changed over time,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
if you look at the raw words, that's
Right.
what that means. The
So
yeah,
and it's it's beautifully written, and it's obviously, I don't think you and I are going to have any qualms with the idea that all men are created equal,
hmm
you know. Um, but yeah, it's something to keep in mind in terms of who's being excluded, and if they're being excluded, why? What's the justification?
hmm
And um, as we sort of move through all the other documents, including the Supreme Court cases, the classic ones, where identity becomes an issue, then you can see how certain people were pushing, being like, "Hey, we should be in that circle.
hmm
We should be in that. We should be in. We should be included." Um, so something to, yeah, sort of wrestle with there. I did think what was interesting, because we brought this up before as well. about and this has come up with Hobbes, and this has come up obviously with Augustine, is the role of religion.
Yeah.
Because in this document, we've got language that is endowed by the.
Oh, you just cut out. Hmm.
Are you there?
Yeah. Okay, I can hear you
Sorry
now.
about that. I don't
That's
know
okay.
why I cut out.
Okay, you're starting to talk about the religious language.
Yeah, so you have this religious language in the document endowed by the Creator, Supreme Judge of the world, divine providence, and I think it's interesting that while a lot of the founding fathers were Christians, not all of them were, and we don't have sort of specifically Christian language, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you do have like religious language, or of some type of supernatural.
Sure.
Um, so I think I don't know, I think this is sort of like interesting that in the founding documents you have it, and um, and it's interesting to see like I don't know how to understand it or like its importance throughout. Like in other words, is it sort of thrown in because there is sort of an acknowledgement of the divine, or is it actually something that's a little bit more pivotal, like something that a Christian or religious person that's living in the United States can sort of point to about the importance of the role of religion? Like, how
Mm-hmm.
do you read it? Read its inclusion?
Um, so specifically the creator and the nature's God entitled them, like those phrases.
Yeah.
Um,
Supreme Judge of the world, divine providence, all comes up.
right. Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell what the intent is
hmm
for bringing it up. Um, I mean, it does seem like they're stating that there is, a creator.
hmm
Um, but I mean, it doesn't seem like it's prescriptive in any way.
Right. Right.
So I mean, definitely had an influence in the creation of the documents. Kind of, they are similar to some like Locke and Hobbes,
hmm
um, attributing the kind of the laws of nature to being something that God put in place,
hmm
maybe. But yeah, I don't know.
I guess what I'm getting at is like it could be thrown in, it could be or whatever. Well, it could just be thrown in, and not fully meant. It could be fully meant,
Yeah, I think it's fully
and
meant.
and then the question is, if it's fully meant, is it?
I don't think there's
Well,
anything
okay,
about it that's
is
like
yeah.
explicitly for a certain religion at this point. Like they're not stating
No,
anything
it
about
isn't.
Christianity. They're not stating anything
Right.
about other religions. So it's kind of a generic, hey, we believe that these rights are from God.
Right.
Um, and we're appealing, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world. Um, so it's kind of like the backing to why they think they have these
Not these
equal,
unalienable
inalienable
rights.
rights. Yeah.
Right, right.
It doesn't seem like there's anything prescriptive about it. It doesn't seem like, they're forcing any kind of religion. That
No,
was kind of the purpose of
not at
being
all.
independent.
Yeah, not at all. I think you're right in the sense that what it's doing is it's establishing a ground for these rights.
Hmm.
You know, I guess what I'm getting at is it also sort of possibly showing us the importance of the divine in, if you will, the political life. I mean, in other words, you know, that you're including it in your theory,
Right.
as it were, seems that it's some, you know, that again, it's not telling you you have to be religious, not
Yep.
telling you have to worship God, but I I sort of feel that as an American, certain people, you know, you could as a religious American, one could actually sort of point back and say, you know, not just my religious expression is protected, but this is actually this is part of our founding. You know,
Right.
this is it ought to be important to a certain degree. Even if we're not
Sure.
even if we're not going to do a state religion, it ought to be important to a certain degree because guess what? It's in our it's in the Declaration of Independence. I don't remember all the God talk. I think there is some God talk actually. Yeah, there is in the articles as
Hmm.
well. I think toward the end it says, "Whereas it has pleased the great governor of the world to incline the hearts of the legislatures, we respectively represent in Congress to approve of and to authorize us to ratify these articles." Um, so yeah, I guess it's more of like a subtle point that um, you know, religion ought to be respected. I mean, we're going to get that later in the Constitution,
Yeah.
but religion ought to be respected, and um, yeah, and because it's in these documents, um, you know, I don't know. It's sort of it's part of the warp and woof of our regime.
So I
You
think,
know.
yeah, I think it's definitely important in that they are using it as a backing for, the reason of these rights. I think if
Hmm.
you wanted to deny that, then you'd have to come up with another reason, right?
Yeah.
So in that
Yeah.
sense, it is important.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
All right. How about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? I'm not going to take this line by line, but that's an important one.
Hmm. Um, so
One
life to,
little bit. Yeah. Go on.
so I mean, life would be to, so unalienable rights, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So life would be, preserving your own life and the life of
Which is
others.
which sounds very like Hobbesian and
Yes.
Lockean,
Hmm.
right? The root of the social contract.
Hmm. Liberty, I mean, that's freedom to do things. Of
Right.
course, it's going to be restricted because it's going to be, like Hobbes
Hmm.
uh,
Right.
and Locke. You can't inflict upon other people's rights in the liberty that you have under,
Hmm.
some sort of contract, unless it was chaos.
Yeah. Exactly. Right.
Yeah, and then the pursuit of happiness is an interesting one. I don't know exactly
Yeah.
what they're trying to say in that because that kind of sounds like liberty repeated.
Yeah. So we know that for Locke it was life, liberty, and estates, or life, liberty, and property.
Hmm.
And apparently, in a separate document um, that was actually drafted by the Continental Congress, but in 1774,
Okay.
entitled "The Declaration of Colonial Rights,"
Okay.
the first right listed is actually for life, liberty, and property. So there was a change in the wording
Mm,
from property to the pursuit of happiness.
interesting.
Um, and keeping in mind, by the way, we haven't said this, but keeping in mind that the Declaration of Independence was essentially drafted by Thomas Jefferson.
Hmm.
So there's a question as to why why there's a shift from property to pursuit of happiness, one, And then what does pursuit of happiness mean, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we can't do life, liberty, and happiness because that would mean that everyone would have a right to be happy, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and I guess in this context, you know, life is obviously the preservation of one's own life. Liberty is the ability to sort of, well, you know what? In many ways, for Locke, it would be I mean, it would be a lot of things, but he's so property oriented. It would be the ability to create property of a variety of sorts, right?
Hmm.
Um, and claim it.
Yep.
And I would imagine too, because there's a lot in the Articles of Confederation about commerce and trade, so the freedom to trade fairly with other colonies and then internationally. Um, and then whatever, I imagine if we throw in religion as well, the ability to express oneself,
Hmm.
right? Um, I even think we got in. I think we got in I think it's the articles where there's actually a claim for the freedom of expression.
Hmm.
So there's a lot that's wrapped up in liberty. Pursuit of happiness, I mean, to me, it seems very vague.
Yeah, it does.
Um, and that's the everything I just said about liberty and what you are pursuing seems to be sort of connected with that, right?
Yep.
I am happy if I am able to, uh, create property that is my own. Uh, I am happy if I'm able to, express myself um, freely. I'm happy if I'm able to express my religion. You know,
You
so
know,
it's interesting. It's an interesting sort of shift.
it's probably, I mean, this is kind of going off on a limb here, but it's probably just the rule of three in writing.
Yeah,
You
right.
know, it didn't want to just say life and liberty. Got to add in the
Yeah,
pursuit of happiness.
yeah, right. But that shift sort of is is interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Uh, I mean,
In
I sort of like it better than property at one level
Yeah,
because it's it's broader. Property is so specific, and there are a lot of different ways to, you know, pursue one's happiness. Um, so I like that I like its openness, but in its openness, it sort of it lacks specificity.
its openness. I mean, I feel like it just sounds like the same thing as liberty. Like
Yeah,
it
yeah,
doesn't sound any like liberty is, freedom to pursue the things that you want to pursue
right,
without inflicting
right.
on other people's rights.
Hmm.
And you can even put property in with liberty. Like,
Yeah,
I mean, it depends, but yeah, I guess it's just a small tagline
yeah.
that's kind of expounded more in the other articles.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I think that at some level that needs to be sort of addressed or teased out.
Hmm.
Um, and and also too, I'm wondering if it's and I'm not saying their original intent, but like as we look back, as we use that document in, let's say, the 21st century, if there is an element of like self-fulfillment, or if you, or to use an Aristotelian term, flourishing, right? Eudaimonia, this idea of
Hmm.
like truly sort of enacting who you are, and in so doing that, one is able to be happy, right? Um, because if you look at a lot of the social ills today, you could see, on the whole spectrum, you know, politically left to right, you can see that whatever a lot of the social ills would be creating unhappiness and therefore warrant some type of change, whether that be sort of like a housing issue for the poor, and so the poor aren't able to be fully actualized, nor will their happiness be because they don't have housing. um, Whatever, women in the workplace, or minorities in the workplace, right? I mean, you can see it seems like there would be an unending um, or an infinite amount of issues that you could sort of say, hey, I'm not able to really realize my happiness because of X, Y, and Z.
Right, but the issue isn't
You know,
realizing it; it's pursuing it.
Yeah. True. 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 All right. Other elements about the Declaration, because I found a lot that were sort of like sort of these references to Hobbes and Locke, and I don't know enough about the this period to challenge
Mm-hmm.
the grievances.
Right.
Um, so, sort of assuming that all of these things were going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, what do you make of the rest of the document?
Um.
We got the preamble, we've got the grievances, then we've got the closing.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot of things that he
Yeah,
has done.
yeah, yeah.
Refused laws, forbidden governors to pass laws. Um, dissolved representative houses repeatedly. I'm trying to remember. I feel like there was one that was more okay. Imposing taxes on us without our consent, cutting off
Mhm.
trade with all parts of the world.
I mean, the some of the some of the things that I found through I mean, right before the grievances actually is the call for the sort of the consent of the governed, which is very, Lockean and Hobbesian, the social contract notion,
Mm-hmm.
that um, this is not sort of old school monarchy slash tyranny where everyone is sort of a subject to the king, but rather this is we need to have their consent, everyone's consent in order to do this society, and that all the injuries and usurpations are a recognition that no one's giving assent to this, right, or consent to this, right? No one's sort of agreeing, with the king that these things are in any way good,
Right.
right? Um, uh, there's language like like what was going on with the colonies in terms of their government is that they did have a governor elected for each state.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was imagining with this document, well, with this and the Articles of Confederation, is that each state is sort of this like independent state yet confederated, right?
Right.
They're sort of like organized, but they're still independent. Sort of like what I would imagine, like Europe, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
have all these different countries. They have their own sovereignty, but if you will, we've got something like the European Union. They're somehow connected, right? But still sovereign.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so you've got the king forbidding the governors to pass laws. Well, that's going to be a problem because the people elected this governor, right,
Yep.
to pass laws, and that's going to be a type of problem. He's also manipulating legislative bodies in terms of like when they can meet, or whether they can meet was one of the grievances. This reminded me a little bit of Locke and sort of the importance of the legislature to assemble,
Yeah.
and not to be in any way hindered from doing so, right? So he's inconveniencing the very body that the people have elected.
Yeah, and like
Um,
you said, with the forbidden the governors to pass laws, but it says of immediate and pressing importance,
yeah,
right? Like I
exactly.
think we talked specifically about the executive, part of government,
Hmm.
in Locke, and it's like they should be able to do things if there's
Yeah,
immediate importance.
exactly. Yeah, that was a big one for him. That actually reminded me a little bit of his notion of the prerogatives, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So they have this prerogative to move quickly, even if um, they don't have the full backing of the legislation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, you've got executive control of the judiciary, so that's a problem.
Yeah.
Um, and that goes back to sort of the Lockean notion of the separation of powers. So we're sort of enfolding these two together, which is going to be a problem. Um, and it seemed that also that every state has its own judiciary, right? So there is no supreme court,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
but every state has its own judiciary. So meddling in that, and then probably one of the worst is waging war against us, right?
Yeah.
Which is, for Locke anyway, I'm not sure so much about Hobbes, is a return to the state of nature,
Yes.
right? You're sort of worse off. Um, so um, yeah, it's funny not having read this in a while. I forgot how much of the document actually does deal with all the grievances.
Mm-hmm.
It was specified, you
Yeah.
but they do. Um, you got the dog barking in the background, and I've got a siren. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So um, and then close. I mean, we do have this sort of comment about the merciless Indian savages, which again raises the question about who's included, who's not.
Yes. Where was
I
that?
guess one could. I mean,
There it is.
regardless of the wording, merciless and savages, I guess one could argue that because these natives are actually not participating in this government,
Yeah.
they're
Mm-hmm.
sort of not included. There's obviously the extra issue though of conquest,
Yes.
right? And what is the right to what is there a right of conquest in this situation of basically taking native land and
Yeah.
claiming it as your own? I don't think that is whatever. Maybe they weren't enlightened enough to sort of see some issues there, right?
Right.
Because at one level you've got the oppression from the crown on the colonies, but then if you were, a native, you could see a type of oppression from the colonists on the natives.
Yep.
Um, so that raises sort of other issues um, about the right of the colonists to sort of claim these lands. My sense is that sort of um, the post-colonial enlightenment was just not a thing. It was not an element of like, oh, I guess we shouldn't be doing this, right? I mean, there have been a number of empires since the huge, long period of colonization of the world that have rescinded colonies and returned it to their people, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think that this has happened, I don't want to say most recently, but I know a few years ago, or maybe longer, Britain did that with uh, India, right? So, or certain parts around India. I'm not sure,
Mm-hmm.
but there is this element of like, okay, this is we don't need to colonize you anymore. We're enlightened. We're not doing this anymore. But I feel like that feature was not a piece, you know,
Yeah.
which will raise questions down the road, especially on the identity one, about things like either reparations or how do if we do have this like post-colonial enlightenment, what is our role then? What's the right thing to do? And I'm, let's say that we should do something, right, to the descendants of those natives. I'm not saying what should be done. I'm not sure about that, but that maybe something should be done. Would seem fair,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um, I mean, it'd be different if we came and contracted with them with all of the social contract language, right?
Right.
And did so peaceably and willingly and freely, both sides. My sense is that's not what happened.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're kind of in a tough situation.
Yeah, right,
Because
exactly.
they're escaping from from their previous government, trying to defend their own rights, and then they've
Right,
got these conflicts with the Indians, the Native Americans,
right.
and it's like how much is justifiable, how much isn't? Is any of it
Yeah,
justifiable?
yeah,
Like maybe the 13 colonies were justifiable, but
right.
beyond that, maybe it wasn't. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's really complicated
I think,
because they're
yeah,
like kind of squashed between these conflicting I guess, social units, you know?
Yeah. And I think probably something that's at play too is that there's not a recognizable government
Yeah.
within these Native American groups.
Mm-hmm.
So this it's not, so in other words, it's not like they're going to be fleeing to like Spain, right, where you have a
Yeah.
recognizable government. No, they actually want to sort of like have, you know, go to a place that is sort of an open space, as it were. And
Yep.
by and large, it is, other than from my knowledge of sort of like tribal gatherings and setups, right? As opposed to like, um, here is the state, here is the border,
Mm-hmm.
here is the recognized government. So yeah, I think the pinch is getting away from the crown to establish this new regime, to enact all of these rights, but then you're doing it where someone already is, and then you're also doing it with slaves.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you've got both of these issues at play.
Yeah.
Um, so we should turn to the articles.
Yes.
I'll let you take the lead on that. As I flip to it in this very big book I found on founding documents in my
Ah.
library.
Um. So I mean, I guess one thing to note is that the different colonies all signed the document at different points in time, which you
Yes,
mentioned.
Maryland was a holdout.
I know Maryland just waited until the
Yeah,
very last moment.
yeah,
I think there was a year, but 2 years between
yeah.
Maryland and Delaware.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, so I guess I don't know how that worked exactly. Like the Articles of Confederation were kind of in limbo until they were signed by all the colonies,
That's what I'm
or
sensing. I'm sensing there's a very long drafting period,
yeah.
and then it's presented and it's debated, and then it's ratified.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, so I wish I could see this better. How many articles were there?
13, I believe.
Yes, 13. 13 articles.
Yeah,
I mean, the first one's very simple, just naming the Confederacy, the United States of
yeah,
America.
right.
Um, the second one retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of these, actually, some of these are shorter than I thought they would be, to
Yeah,
say what
yeah,
they're going to say, but
sure.
that's kind of hashed out in the U.S.
Hmm.
Constitution. But yeah, I was getting a lot of the same vibes as, Hobbes and Locke in kind of
Hmm.
like having more specifics for
Hmm.
the social contract
Hmm.
instead of, theory, I guess.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so the state said states firm league of friendship with each other, so they're at peace with each other, with their
Hmm.
liberties, um, mutual friendship.
Yeah. I think
There's
with like with Article 2, I'm reminded. So the state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence in every power,
mhm.
jurisdiction, and right. I'm just reminded of the fact that this is the state is sovereign. There is no
Yes.
federal. There's no federal government. We have no president.
Yep.
We have no. We have this sort of like Continental Congress, but it's in a sense administrative for the states, right? As opposed to the states being um, sort of underneath this larger federal canopy. I mean, this will come up more as we get into the Constitution and the Federalist Papers.
Hmm.
But I, I think my reading of this was I was like, oh wow, these are sort of like little countries,
Yeah, and they're
you
like
know.
coming to agreements with one another,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
mutual
Um,
agreements.
yeah, and I had sort of noted some of the things about the third article as well, the friendship component, um, uh, defending each other in common,
Yes. Hmm.
right? Um, I did think that Article 4 was interesting because it came up with this again, who's inside, who's outside the circle.
Hmm.
And you've got paupers, vagabonds, fugitives from justice accepted, which is interesting, because your paupers and your vagabonds are also not property. So it seems like the focus is still sort of on um, those that are included in this and whose rights will be protected are landed uh, landed men primarily. Although paupers and vagabonds would be, if we sort of intertextualize here, would still be part of the all humans are created equal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, and yeah, I mean, it might be like, well, fugitives from justice, come on, maybe we can exclude them. But there's one of the issues that sort of comes to mind with that one. I know it's not a fugitive from justice, fugitive per se, right? Someone that's sort of on the run. But I do know that if you are a felon in certain states, you actually can't vote,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there is still this element of sort of crime lingering over, or your crime history lingering over the individual. And to what degree is that really fair, right?
Right.
Um, but the paupers and the vagabonds, who knows what their particular story is in terms of their station in life, and is it you know fair to sort of exclude them? Um, Article 5, I thought was interesting because freedom of speech, like those three words come up, right?
Mm-hmm.
In determining questions in the United States and Congress assembled, each state shall have one vote. Freedom of speech and debate in Congress shall not be impeached or questioned in any court. So I think it's interesting that this already gets included, and we'll see with the Constitution and the amendments to the Constitution that this becomes a pivotal piece, and it's such a pivotal piece of American culture and life, right? Um, are you
Yeah.
there?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You um, so I thought it was just sort of an interesting note. It's like, oh wow, this came up earlier, or early, and also too, to what degree was this freedom impeded under the crown?
Right.
Um, so um, oh, also too, a same article, delegates work as representatives without pay. That's my own term, but I thought that was interesting to note. That is certainly not the case for our modern day representatives and senators.
Wait, where did it say that?
That's going to be Article 5,
Yep.
uh, but that's my paraphrase.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's not the, it's when they give the term limit, and then it's toward the
Oh,
end.
3 of any 6 years.
And then it's like,
Nor shall any
be
person
capable.
being a delegate be capable of holding any office under the United States for which he or another for his benefit receive any salary, fees, emolument of any kind. Now, I was wondering, did that mean that he could not receive those, like he could not receive pay from another title under
Sure.
government,
Yeah.
but he could under that
For
title?
being a
Like,
delegate.
being a delegate, he could receive pay, but not hold another office under the
Sure,
United States.
sure.
That's how I interpreted it.
Um, so nor shall any person, so that's our subject. We don't, obviously that person being a delegate,
Yeah.
uh, for which he receives any salary, fees, or of any kind. It. I mean, it seems like as a delegate, he is not to receive a salary, but that's not to say, like, my sense was of this, but obviously it's open to interpretation. My sense of this was that he wasn't to receive any pay as a delegate, as his time as a delegate.
Mm.
That's not to say that he is not, he's like uh, um, a his occupation is to grow tobacco on his farm in Maryland and sell it and receive, pay from that. I think that my understanding was like that's fine. He's just serving as a delegate for this period of time. He's still able to obviously have a salary, get an income from some
Mm-hmm.
source, and but not, you know, that was my sense.
Okay. I mean, yeah,
He's
my
not getting paid.
be that.
paid as a representative. Because I mean, obviously, if most of these men are propertied, and property is, you have a huge sort of like farming industry at this time, right? At certain, depending on what climate you are in, from the Georgia all the way up to, God, what's the highest one? Boston, I guess, Massachusetts. Um, then you're obviously, you're getting an income through whatever you're growing and selling,
Mm-hmm.
which would, and you're sort of, which made it seem to me, if I'm reading this right, that public service is entirely public.
Right.
It's entirely for, without an incentive, as it were,
Yeah.
um, financial incentive to sort of like, you know stay in the political game, so on and so forth. You serve as a delegate for your term, you return to being a private citizen.
Yeah, and
Someone else.
if that is how it is, it kind of sounds similar to some church governments.
Yeah, exactly.
Um.
Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Are you there?
yeah, I'm here.
Sorry. Which I think is interesting because in our system now, you can continually be elected to the House of Representative or the Senate, and you make a career out of it.
Yep.
And it raises the question, then, to what degree are you really working for the country, or to what degree are you working for your own political
Mm-hmm.
survival?
There's
You
conflict
know?
of interest there.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, my own sense, at least in theory, would be term limits, and possibly a pay cap. So almost sort of like jury duty. You know,
Yeah.
um, and you would draw in a mix of every type of individual and every type of class, so that you in a sense, then, as a representative, you're bound to the job and what's going to be good for the country, for that period. Even if you're working for your own group, it's a term limit. You're done, and
Mm-hmm.
there's enough people to be able to fill those roles, like jury duty, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what are we? 100 people in Senate and some 500 or so in the House. That would be easy, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so, but yeah, I thought that was an interesting piece.
Definitely.
Um, yeah, there's.
So, like, keeping arms
Hmm.
uh, in times of peace should not like exceed a certain number.
Hmm.
There's kind of like that agreement there. Not engage
Right.
in war without consent of the United States of Congress.
Yeah, that's an interesting piece. Right.
Yeah, I think there's an unless such state be actually invaded by enemies. Yeah,
Right.
so not to initiate war as a state in and of itself,
Hmm.
unless it's being invaded upon. Uh, so yeah, I guess I mean that prevents that like ensures that the states are united in
Hmm.
any kinds of conflict that they initiate.
Yeah.
Instead of like, oh hey, we met in Congress. By the way, we're at war. We need help. Whoa,
Right.
hold on, we're not ready for that. Why did you start a war? You know.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
the Indians are also mentioned here.
Yeah. It's an interesting balance between, um, sort of like state rights and United States rights. You
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that's I think that's I mean, it's a very interesting sort of balance, and obviously we deal with that in our day and age as well, right? Meaning, in other words, there might be a federal law, but the state doesn't abide by it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, legalizing marijuana. So California can legalize marijuana, but it's still on the books at the federal level to be illegal.
Right.
You know, so there, I think we're going to continue to find this ongoing struggle between state rights and nation right or federal right.
Mm-hmm.
That'll be sort of this ongoing struggle.
And like, who has which has the actual jurisdiction. Like,
Yeah.
should the federal have the power over certain things?
Right. Right.
Um,
It does, right? I mean,
yeah,
like at any point, seemingly at any point, the DEA could, shut down any of the dispensaries in California.
right.
I mean, they could, because it's still, marijuana is still considered illegal at the federal level. What's interesting is when I say that, I'm like, where is that law? I mean, I mean, it's somewhere,
Yep.
Um, but yeah, so they could do that, but it's sort of like discretion. It's like to what degree, like in other words, changing attitudes about, let's say, marijuana versus cocaine or heroin. Also, to the DEA's got a bunch of other stuff to do,
Mm-hmm.
like pressing concerns. So yeah, it's totally an issue of discretion. But yes, that we'll continue to see that debate.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, there was one interesting comment about um yeah, this is Article 8. It was like all charges of war, etc., 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 shall be defrayed out of a common treasury, which shall be supplied by the several states. And then, in proportion, I thought this was interesting, to the value of all land within each state.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And that was interesting. One, because of the importance, once again, of property, and the and this would be sort of your federal part, as it were, right? This would be that the treasury is common, the treasury is federal, um, or maybe the word is confederated, um, and then can be sort of tapped into by the states. I thought it was interesting, like in proportion to the value of the land, which then would mean that you would have to have people assessing
Yeah.
the land, um, and also it's a little vague in what proportion. You with me? Um,
I mean, I guess you take all the colonies, you take their values, and then that's the proportion that they must submit. But the question is, what's
what's the amount?
the amount? Yeah.
Yeah, like a percentage of it or something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess they agree on the percentage, like, hey, we need this for war, and then they're
mhm,
like, okay, you've got this value of land, you're doing this percentage of it.
right. 9 was super long, but we did get the idea, or we did get the notion that the United States in Congress has the sole and exclusive right and power of regulating alloy and value of coin. Uh,
Yes.
so we've got the notion of the Congress, the Congress having control then over, or whatever, being able to coin, uh, being able to mint money, um, and I imagine set the value. Yeah, set the value. So that would not be a state right to do. That would
Yep.
be a Congress right. So also in 9, where we get a bit of a race issue,
Well, there's
where
also before. Wait,
yeah,
there's uh, issues of soil,
mm-hmm,
claimed under two or more states. I'm trying to see what does that say. Regulate. Okay, yeah, I guess that was before the coin.
mm-hmm.
What was that saying? Deprived of territory.
Oh, all controversies concerning the private right of soil.
Yeah. Oh, I guess just disputing the territories of the states.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so Congress, I'm guessing, is acting as judge in a dispute,
Yeah.
right?
There's
Um,
a lot of things about judges too in this section.
yeah.
Commissioners are judges.
Mm-hmm.
Judges of the Supreme or Superior Court of the state. So
Yeah.
not of the United
No,
States.
no Supreme Court, no clear. Well, yeah, because there's no president either.
Yeah.
There's the highest body at this point is Congress, and all the delegates sent from each state or colony
Yes.
slash state. Um, so yeah, I did.
Appoint a committee of the states.
Yeah.
Yep, that was all legislative, kind of.
Hmm.
Um, Never engage in war. Repeat it again. A power to adjourn at any time. Wait, where was the Indian part?
Indian part. Oh no, this was a race part because it says in proportion. I need to find the section though, because this was a massive section. Um,
It's in 9. This it's
the line it's
trade with the Indians was mentioned. What were you talking
like,
about?
but I'm not getting the lead in.
Okay, white inhabitants. This is page
Oh,
943.
I see it. Yeah. Um, so getting the context there. Oh, this is a. Okay, so they're taking a committee of the United States to consist of one delegate from each state,
Mm-hmm.
other committees, civil officers, so on and so forth. But I think this goes on to another element. Office of President.
Public
Obviously, Office of
expenses.
President there, I'm imagining is sort of, if you will, like the President of the Congress, not the President of the United States.
Right.
Um, and then it's to ascertain the necessary sums of money to be raised for the services of the United States to appropriate and apply the same for defraying the public expenses, so basically money, to
Mm-hmm.
borrow, emit bills on the credit of the United States, etc., to build and equip the Navy, to agree upon the number of land forces, and to make requisitions from each state for its quota in proportion to the number of white inhabitants in each state. Um, so this is essentially a monetary fiscal element based on um, the number of white individuals in each state.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's just sort of another element here about what about non-whites that might be within that state.
Yeah.
Um,
I wonder what the purpose behind that was. Were they worried that states that had more slaves would require more
I
funding
could
for their navy?
I could see that. I could totally see that.
Like the proportion
Because
was just out of
I mean, there's a
pace.
question to pose too: to what degree are we already starting to see a distinction between slave ownership between the North and the South?
Yeah.
Because it's all the Mid-Atlantic, essentially. These colonies are running along the Atlantic seaboard. So, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because in some of my background reading, it was already the case that some of the founding fathers were looking down on negatively on the institution of slavery,
Mm-hmm.
but yet stuck in it,
Okay.
and 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 I mean, there wasn't a full transition out, right,
Right.
for years.
Yeah.
Um, but so there, yeah, I could, if that's the case, I could totally see that. So if there were, let's say, more of a population in Georgia, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
or in Maryland, whatever it might be, then yeah, I could see that. Just sort of like, hey, no, that we're trying to keep this fair with those that are included in the circle.
Yeah.
Now, let me just raise in conclusion, because I know we've been going for a while here,
Mm-hmm.
that some issues that I noted overall that are that make me wonder whether or not the articles are somewhat weak in comparison to the Constitution that we get later
Yep.
is you have no chief executive.
Yeah.
You have no president as we understand. A president of Congress is going to be different than the president that is in his or her own branch,
Yep.
right? I mean, I want to say the president of Congress is more of an administrative role
For
for
the
the
legislature.
for it to get its work done.
Yeah.
Um, Also, too, the question is, I wasn't really sure with the wording, like does Congress really have the power to tax citizens at this point, as it's stipulated in the document, or is it only that they're requesting monies from the states? Like the language, as I read some of the monetary areas, you know, was sometimes vague, and so I wasn't really sure whether or not, um, the whether or not it was absolutely detailed and specified in terms of how you are, you know, raising these funds. I mean, some of them are clear, like what we just read, right? The proportion of whites.
Hmm.
Um, but I imagine they had to imagine they had to tread a little bit lightly on this because of,
Because it was in their Declaration of Independence to escape the taxing.
exactly, yeah, like exactly.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, so Article 8 says the taxes for paying that proportion shall be laid and levied by the authority and the direction of the legislatures of the several states within the time agreed upon the United States of Congress assembled. And that's
mhm,
for charges of war.
right.
So it looks like it's not a perpetual taxation. It's like when war
Right.
comes, we need to levy these,
Hmm.
these charges.
Right. Another thing that I saw was that laws needed approval by 9 of the 13 states,
Yes.
which encourages like state rights, which is great. But 9 out of 13 to get stuff done seems like it could be really inconvenient. You know,
What do you
like,
mean? It's
well,
69%.
yeah, yeah. All right, 69 is not bad. Maybe I'm thinking about the one where they had to have the full 13, and it was like what was this? This was toward the Article 13, actually, where it says, nor shall any alteration at any time hereafter be made in any of them, that referring to these articles, unless such alteration be agreed to in a Congress of the United States and afterwards confirmed by the legislature of every state of
Hmm.
every. Maybe I'm thinking of the 13. Like so, um, I mean, it seems like you would want to make some things difficult, and I guess too maybe it does make sense because this is the social contract we're making. We're looking at a social contract.
Yeah.
Um, every 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 member should be party to it if there's going to be an alteration to the
Hmm.
article. However, um, that's real tricky, like in
Yeah.
terms of getting everyone to agree on it. The other issue was there's no federal military,
Yeah.
and there's state military, which again goes back to state rights. Um, and maybe at that time with 13 colonies, you could, or states, you could, you know, if you were attacked from outside, you would be able to sort of draw all those necessary troops together.
Hmm.
But it seems like in 21st century America, the idea of a national military um, makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
versus,
Well, with the powers of the world today, it definitely
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. So maybe at that time it was one that was uh, could work,
Yeah.
calling up your National Guard.
I mean, they declared they got their independence.
That that is, and then no national court system.
Hmm.
Um, so that and it's not that that's necessarily a problem, you know, um, but and we'll have to see, next week the rationale for it, right? Um, but it does, I mean, in other words, and it'll make us actually think about the nature of the Supreme Court even more, right? Why
Yeah.
can't you just leave it up to the state judiciary to decide things? If you do that, you give the states their rights, right? Um, and power over their own people and their own little border. So what I would just say that if they don't have one, is that a problem? Um, but I could see the advantages, right? It's like we are still our own little sovereignty here, and we can still that power is shown, as it were, through having our own court system, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to and then the overall element, which totally makes sense at the time, is that the articles seem very fearful of a of an all too powerful centralized government, um, and that I mean, it's not a problem, but it's just sort of a sense,
Mm-hmm.
um, that that I had throughout sort of reading them. It's just this, and it makes sense going back to the beginning of the conversation about the context,
Yeah.
right? British Crown, way too powerful. Um, I mean, it just dawned on me too. It's like, would I have actually more freedoms as an individual the closer you get to me in terms of um, uh, whatever, all these three things: executive, judiciary, and legislature. Like, in other words, if you did keep it at the level of the state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, would I actually have, and you still have something like what they have at this time, like you still have a Congress, but it's very sort of just you know supportive of the states. But the closer those three elements are to me, okay, so, and I would say that they're closer to me at the state level than they are at the federal level.
Yep.
Do I having a look? Do I don't know. Do I have more freedom? Do I have more representation, so on and so forth? I don't know.
Probably.
You know?
The issue becomes when you have problems that go between the states, right? Like
Yeah.
if someone, like if the laws are different between the states, which I mean, I guess that's up to. I don't know if that would happen back in under the Articles of Confederation, but they are now. If the laws are different between the states, then what do you do with someone who breaks the law in one state and flees, or is from a different state? Like, you have to find a way to deal with the conflicts between
Yeah.
states.
Yeah. And
Um,
then, too, it seems like if you don't have a strong federal government, and strong is vague, but you don't have a strong federal government, then what do you do when you deal with so I'm taking it up from states to nations. What do you do with international issues, right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, um, but I don't know. It just sort of dawned on me, as all of this political interactions, as it were, between these three, the closer they are to me, is it more representative? Is it are they more representative of me, and therefore I'm getting more uh, liberties than I would otherwise, as opposed to something that is far removed, and sort of does blanket laws.
Mm-hmm. And what are you compromising in doing that?
Right, right. Um, so, and I think especially, I mean, obviously we go to the Constitution next week or the next 2 weeks, but when we go to the Federalist Papers, this is going to come up a lot because they then have a debate about. Um,
Oh, did you cut out? Oh no.
sorry, I think each time an alarm goes off, it kicks me off the call.
Oh, weird. Okay.
So it's probably a good place to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll talk about the Federalist Papers when we get to them.
Exactly.
Sounds good. All right, I will stop the recording.